In this video, I'm going to show you the naming convention that I'm using to set up the whole character in the scene, and then we'll start laying in all the joints and bones to get this fish ready to start rigging and animating. All right, before we start laying in the bones for this character, I just want to show you how I set up the folders or the groups for this character to actually make the animating process a lot easier and cleaner. I learned this method from digital tutors. There's a few really great series on rigging characters for Maya. And essentially I have a fish node, or like the character node. This holds everything. And then inside of this, I have a global move, blend shapes, which I don't think I'll be using. And then model, which is the actual geometry itself, is held within this. And then inside of this, I have extra nodes and nodes to show and nodes to hide, and these are ones that wouldn't move, so they could be things like, for instance, if we use a hair for simulation and there's like a nucleus or something like that that we need, that can be put in there. That anything that doesn't track to the character's actual body. The global move is everything that needs to actually be moved around the scene, so we have all these attributes enabled for movement and scale. And inside this is joints, IKs, and control objects. And this will gradually be filled up, and this is where we'll be putting our skeleton. And within each one of these, I've actually locked and hidden all the attributes except for visibility for all of these, because I don't want to be able to move them or scale them or do anything with these. And the same thing goes with these blend shapes, model, and extra nodes group, because I really am not moving them. The point is they're just containers to hold things, and any moving is handled by the global move. Now that I've addressed that, I can start putting some joints together. The way I had initially planned on doing this was controlling each spine or each joint along the back and using that to animate the fish. But what I decided to do after some experimentation is actually use a spline IK and use a deformer to actually move the fish's body. So because of that, I'm not going to set up a neck joint and a head joint like I normally would, where I would have a center of gravity or a center joint where I reverse the bone structure. So I would go the joints, let's just say for instance, one set of joints would go down the body like this and into the tail, and then I would create another set that essentially goes up the neck, so that at this center point here, I'd be able to reverse the control and have the fish sort of curl either way. Because I'm not doing that, I'll just want to run an entire joint chain down the whole length of the fish, since my spline IK is actually going to be doing most of the animation, and my deformers will do all the animation on the actual character. And I can position those deformers so that they actually act upon this center point right here. So I don't really have to do the same level of joint structure. The main thing I need to keep in mind though is that I want enough joints along the spine to accommodate for the fact that I'm going to need a lot of little fingers or phalanges to drive these fins, because these fins I want them to wobble or wave like wiggling fingers, and I also want them to have the ability to fold down. Okay, so let's start laying in some of these joints. I want to try to be as clear as possible when I'm moving through the joints, and I want to think about all the different things I'm going to need to do. I'm going to want to also create a gills structure, so I want some bones that actually drive the movement of this gill here. And okay, so let's start laying in some joints. I'm going to go from the side view, and I just made sure also that I have X-ray joints selected in shading so that I can see through the character, see the joint through the character. And I guess I'm going to start up at the very base of the head, and this is where I'll probably end up hooking my jaw and things like that. So I'm just going to run up along a spine here, down the fish's back, and I want to make sure that when I'm creating joints, I'm also creating enough points that can come up to control places to create some fingers to control those fins. Now the reason I'm giving myself a little more space to the bottom is because I want to add some joints to create a bit of breathing movement in the belly area of the fish. Now the nice thing about this is that I'm not going to have to animate any of these joints, so I can have lots and lots of them. Okay, and then I want to check just make sure that their local rotation axes are okay. So what I want for this is I want on the X to be rotating up and down, and on the Z to be rotating in and out, and then on the Y to be twisting down the body. So I think it looks like it's okay. I think all of them look all right. So one way you can check your local rotation axes is by pressing F8 and then enabling the question mark, and you can sort of see everything. If you need to actually look at the local rotation axis of the joint, you can go to display, and it's under transform display and local rotation axis, and I've just also created a little shelf item here for me to use to do that. And you can just look at the actual orientation of that joint here as well. But I'm going to turn that off for now. They actually look okay. Everything looks like it's lining up properly. So again, if I go into F8 and I enable this little question mark here, I can see the local rotation axis. And the only one that doesn't point down the chain where the Y is pointing down the chain is this last one, but that doesn't matter because it's not influencing any rotation of anything. All the rest of them, the Y is moving down the chain, the X is pointing out, and the Z is pointing up. And that's what I want. All right, so I'm going to stay in the side view and just set up some of the other bone structures for the rest of this fish. So I'm just going to press Enter and Y. So I'm going to create a new bone chain here, and then we'll go in and rename them after. But I'll just put this here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So there we go. Okay, and then I'll do one more. We'll do one more chain for this one. So let's go another one. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so this will be the main fin that obviously controls his direction in a way, the dorsal fin. So then these next fins here, and I'm just trying to make the starting joint down at the bottom here. I don't want too many bones because it's just going to make it a lot of extra work to rig all of it up and then build all the controls in, because I do have to make specific expressions for a lot of these. Okay, and then I'm just pressing Y. We'll make a new one. Okay, so I'm just going to speed through this because it takes me quite a while to figure out the exact joint layout that I want when working with this fish. I didn't really test it or anything, but what I'm imagining is how I'm going to animate the character and how those joints are going to move to deform the surfaces they're going to be attached to. I've looked at a lot of underwater swimming fish footage while doing this to try to get an idea of how the fins actually move and operate. And I know that I'm going to need a lot of little joint chains to create the subtle waving motions that are present in the fins, but they also contract and expand very actively. So they're pretty dynamic things. So they need a lot of control, but obviously not too much because then it gets really hard to manage. And we're not trying to make a real looking fish here. The goal is to create a really beautifully animated, illustrated fish. The next part here is the two fins on the side. So these are pretty straightforward joint chains. And then I'm just creating the jaw and the lower jaw and the upper jaw, keeping in mind that I do want them to bend quite a bit. Now here I'm trying to get a handle on where the eye bones are going to be because I want to use an IK chain to actually drive the eyeball around. It makes it a lot easier than creating a whole look at node and everything. So here I'm just trying to find its center rotation axes, and then I'm going to put a bone right at that center. And I got that by turning on the local rotation axis of the eyeball, which shows me the exact center or the rotation center point of the eye. And then eventually I'll run another bone out to the front of the eye. Like that. There we go. So that will allow me to control the eyeball down the road. Okay, so now I need to do the ones for the gills. And these I think are just going to be a joint here, because this joint's going to rotate to make the jaw. This joint I want to affect the gills. So they'll be slightly different, each one of these. And then from here, I'm just going to press Enter, and then I'm going to make a joint there, Enter, and then a joint here down at the bottom of this gill. Enter. Now I'm not sure, I might have to fix some of the geometry there, but essentially if we go into the outliner, what I'll do with those last three joints, or these last two, is let's go in here and we'll put these joints in here. So that becomes my controller for the actual gill. So as you can see, and then what I can do is just move this out, move it out here. I'm not going to worry about it being rotated to fit to the form of the fish. It just doesn't matter. I want it to be at 0. And what I'll do is use it to go like this to create movement in the gills. I may change the orientation a little bit of some of the joints. Anyways, we'll see. But essentially, this is going to rotate outwards like that to make the fish's gills open and close. The only problem is I don't like... I might have to change the orientation of this joint, actually, because I think I want it to be horizontal. So let's go F8, and then click on this joint here. I'm going to rotate its local rotation axis to here. When the joint's rotating, let's go F8 again. I want it to rotate on this sphere's axis here, this joint's axis, not this here. So as we go like this, I want it to rotate perfectly like that. Now this joint I may push back in a little bit or angle in. So which we can do just by press W, insert, and I can just reposition that joint in a bit. So I don't want it displacing so much. I want this one to displace the most, and then this one, these top two to just displace the least. So when this guy's rotating, so let's just go back, insert, and E, quit, and then have a look at this. There, I'm getting a little bit better. Anyways, we'll play with it and see what looks good. But I think that's all right. Okay, I might not even need these two top ones. I might just need this one, and then just make sure I paint the weights properly for it. In fact, I think I'm just going to do that. Let's delete these two joints. I don't think I really need them. This will be my one gill joint here, and that's going to function as my gills. And I'll just make sure I paint the weights properly so that it affects the right amount of area. And the last thing we'll need is some lungs. Let's just pull these out. Just going to position these joints a little better. Okay. I'm going to pull this out here. There we go. Okay. I think that's good for now. I have to put a lung in there somewhere, but I'm not going to worry about that until I've assembled the skeleton. Okay, so the other thing I need to do is I need to rotate these out so that they're more aligned with this fin. I mean, I could just make that fin directly stick to the side of the body, but that's not its natural state. So what I want to do is I'm going to rotate this, and I see that on the Z I have it at negative 30.5, well, just negative 30. On the joint orient on the Z axis, I can just put negative 30, and that should, if this works properly, that should adjust the joint appropriately, and it's not going to change any of my rotation values up here. The transform attributes you do not want to, especially in the rotate, you want those at 0. It's fine that they're shifted around here, but the actual rotate, I want to keep it 0 because I want to be able to zero out the skeleton and have the joints return to their native position where I intended them to be in the beginning. So if I rotate this and have a look, it's at negative 30 again. So let's just we can just put joint orient and negative 30. Whoops, didn't work. All right, so it took me a little bit to actually get these joints to orientate properly because it only worked properly with this one guy. On the other ones, I had to really mess around with these numbers until I got them right. So I just played with them until I found the right rotation. The thing that actually helped me figure out what I had to do was by going into joint orientation mode and actually just rotating those joints until I got the angle I wanted. And then I just copied this angle that emerged down here and pasted in the joint orient. So that's what I ended up doing. So hopefully that helps clarify a couple of things. I might actually change this a little more. 110. There we go. Okay. So the next step is going to be actually parenting all these things to the proper joint chains. So if I open up this chain, I actually want to parent all of these to this joint here. So these two guys to this joint. So I can just middle mouse drag them up into there, or I could have just selected the two. And the reason I want to do that is because I want this guy to drive the whole fin, and then have each one of these have their own influence on the actual fin itself, so that I can compress the fin or wave it around or do what I need to. All right, and then the other thing I need to consider is which part of the body in which part of the spine are these joints attached to. So along the actual spine chain here, what area, what bone are they actually connected to? So when the spine or the fish's body moves, what do I want them to follow? So that's going to be something that's important to consider when I'm actually putting all of these together. And I think that most of these fins are going to follow this joint here, since they're sort of in line with it. I think what I might do is actually start naming all of this. And the way I'm going to name it is, again, I learned this from digital tutors, so I take no credit for this naming convention. This is bone. I'm going to call this spine 01. And then I'm just going to go all the way down until I hit the end. 02. I'm just going to speed through this renaming process. I think there's a better way to rename things if your joints are named properly. I can't really remember the best way to do it, so I just went through it manually. And here I'm just showing you the structure of the fish at the moment. As you can see, I don't have all the body parts connected yet. There's basically the spine, and then each one of these clumps running down, these little groups here of joints, are all the different fins and the little phalanges. And I've named them appropriately. I haven't named them anatomically correct, but I've named them in a way that makes sense to me. I can get away with this because I'm actually rigging the fish as well. So once any animators get their hands on the fish, everything will be taken care of, and hopefully they won't have to think about it. Here I've just created an individual joint that is the head. And this is going to be where the eye and the jaw base connect to, and the gill base connect to, and quite possibly some of the other fins. And like I said earlier, I didn't create a neck or anything like that because we're going to be using a sine wave to actually drive the fish's body animation. And I don't want to have unique control over the head. Not specifically anyway. It's something you can add if you want, but for this particular execution, I didn't actually find the need for it. And here I'm just double checking the jaw rotation points and stuff like that. And after doing some research on some fish anatomy, I found that the jaw rotation point, the hinge, is actually quite close to just right under the eyeball. So my joint's a little bit forward, but it actually ended up working out okay. So as you can see, I'm just rotating the jaw there and making sure that it's basically in the right spot. And then I'm going to get a decent movement with the mouth because I want a really good stretch as the mouth opens up. I watched a bunch of footage of fish breathing and using their mouths. And their mouths are super complicated, and it's not going to be possible for me to get that level of detail in the mouth. It's just too much. They almost have this inner mouth going on that pushes forward as their other mouth opens up. So it's very multi-layered and difficult to actually create. So I decided not to worry so much about it, and because we're not going to get that close to these fish, so it's not a huge deal. If it was like a hero character of some kind, then maybe I'd worry about it. But a lot of people don't know that's the way fish's mouths work, and I think there's a lot of room for generalizing, especially when you're doing illustration and cartoons. Okay, if you haven't noticed, what I've been doing is actually parenting the upper and lower jaws to the rest of the head. And here I've selected the eye, and then I've selected the head base that we created and just parented them by pressing P. So I'm starting to parent all my skeleton or my joint chains to other parts of the body. And you can just do that by selecting one joint chain and then shift selecting the other and pressing P. And then that will parent that joint group underneath that other joint. So it's a pretty easy way to create connections. You can do it visually as well in the outliner on the left, as you can just select the group, the top of the node, and actually just middle mouse drag it into the appropriate spine or wherever you want it. So I'm just going to go through really quickly and connect all of these different joint chains to the rest of the spine using that method by selecting the joint chain and then selecting the appropriate joint I want it to parent to. Okay, so I'm just going to speed through, and you can see all these joints getting connected to their corresponding spine or vertebrae. So that's the majority of the fish rigged up. I'm missing the actual lung, which needs to be put in. Not that fish actually have lungs that operate the same way we think, but I wanted a little bit of an expanding belly just to give it that extra sense of life and movement. So I've just created this new joint chain just out of nowhere using the joint tool, and then I'll just connect it to the appropriate vertebrae. And make sure you name it. It's really important to name your skeleton very thoroughly and very well, because it makes a world of difference when you start using the connection editor and start making some expressions. It just makes it so much clearer to understand what's going on, especially if you have to troubleshoot after the fact. It'll be really hard to remember all these different joints and pieces 3 months from now when I need to fix something if I named them terribly. Here I'm just repositioning the joint orientation, not repositioning, rotating the joint orientation so that the lung is pointing slightly out to the side of the body, and then just messing with it until I get it the right angle. This isn't the best way to do it. There's lots of other ways to reorientate your joints, but I don't know how to do them all, so I find the manual method is just fine for me because I'm not doing anything that requires absolute accuracy. So that's the lung. And as you can see, the basic structure of this fish is pretty clear to look at when you're seeing it all expanded like this. It makes a lot of sense. Now what I'm doing here is selecting the left fin. I think that's a pectoral fin. I'm selecting it, and I'm just going to mirror that joint chain. And you can use the mirror joint tool to actually pull this off, and it works really well. I just had to experiment to figure out which direction I had to mirror on, but it worked pretty flawlessly. I did have to go back in and rename things because I didn't change the naming convention properly, but on the whole it was really fast, saved me a bunch of time. And the nice thing is too is it flips your rotations so that everything still works the same, so when you do your rigging, it all works properly. So now I basically have two major joint chains, and one is the head and the other is the spine. So everything that goes from the head down, and then I've got everything from the head up. Eventually I will parent these under what I call a center, and then that will be the primary pivot point so that I can isolate and control the head if I want without influencing the rest of the spine and the other way around. So I'm just finishing up renaming this joint chain here. There. So I think this guy at this stage is mostly finished. Okay, I just want to review the bone structure for this character really quickly. Let's turn off this local rotation axis. So, okay, so let me just close this all down. All right, so currently I have the head and the spine separate. I haven't joined them together yet. But essentially, if we open up spine, as you go down the spine, you'll see that there are various elements of the fish connecting into the spine. Along his fins, we have all the fin phalanges that are going to be used to bend the fins around. Those are coming in intermittently through the spine, connecting through, and this is so that when the body rotates, the correlating spines and phalanges for the fins actually go with it. But these individual joint chains will work independently of the spine. So essentially they're all parented in there. So we have the spine, and then we have this fin group right here, which is going to be the main driving fin, and then we have these two guys down here, but the bottom left and the bottom right. So those are all parented to the spine too. They're all part of the spine too. And then as you just move down, you can just sort of expand everything and go through it all. But as we move down, you can just sort of see how everything's connected. And I've also got here, I've got a little lung. So this is going to be used to help the fish breathe. And let's just take a look at the head. It's pretty self-explanatory. We've got the tail bits here. These tail bits here are going to be, these joint chains here at the tail are going to be used to actually open and close the tail, and they'll work in collaboration with this chain here. So this will be used to open and close and twist the tail like that, and they'll all sort of work together. Now the other part to look at is the actual head. So we have the head here, and as part of the head I have the gill. So when the head rotates around, that's going to control all this stuff here, and on that we have the gill. So the gill will open and close here, and then the jaw, which will rotate from this point. Now this isn't like a really realistic fish jaw, but it's I checked a couple of references and it's close enough. Now I have these chains here, and these are going to be used to curl the lip up and down a little bit if I need to. So this will allow me to curl the lip once I get to that point. And then this last one here, this will be used, this bone here will actually be used to drive the eye. So the next stage will be to create sort of a center bone for all these guys, or we can just put the actual spine underneath the head or the head underneath the spine, one or the other. Or we can create a center joint. So if I want to create a center joint for the whole thing, what I can do is just create a new joint, hold down V and click here. Okay, I've created a new joint, and now I'll just drag it into there. Okay, and this I'm going to call my, we'll just call this bone center, and 0, 1. Not 100% necessary, but I like to have it anyways. And I just want to check its orientation, because it may not be orientated properly, which it's not. So I want to rotate that joint orient -90, I think. There we go. And we want probably the Z facing up, and I don't think it matters specifically what direction Y faces down, but we need that Z to be pointing up. So there we go. Okay, great. No, let's do that -90. Okay, so there we have it. It's orientated properly. So now what we can do is just parent both of these, the spine and the head, to this actual center. So now we have bone center, and that is from that we can rotate the spine or rotate the head exclusively if we want to. The next thing to do is actually stick that in our global move and joints group here. So I'm going to put this into the joints. I may end up changing this bone center depending on how the animation works. If I end up using the sign controller on the spline IK chain, I may end up getting rid of this because I won't need it, this center. I only have this so that I can isolate the head and control it exclusively from the rest of the body. Okay, so there we go. I think we're ready to start adding either some controls in there or skinning. It's really up to you at this point. You can go one way or the other. I'm thinking of just adding some controls. Okay, so the skeleton for this thing is all finished. So the next stage is either putting in the bones or rigging it up. I'm thinking I'll do some rigging because I want to be able to use my rig controls to test my skinning. So in the next video, I'm going to show you some setup for control objects that are just basic CV curves, and then start creating some attributes on those control objects that can drive some joint rotations so that we can create some really handy attributes to help automate some of the animation process for this fish so that we don't have to animate every single joint. So it should be a pretty fun process. It's a little bit involved, but nothing too crazy. It's pretty manageable, especially compared to the expressions that I've done in the past with After Effects. Found a nice way to transition from After Effects into Maya using Maya's expressions. So it should be pretty cool to check out. Before we end this video, I just want to remind you that all of the creative content in this tutorial is the property of TAQQUT Productions Incorporated.